I opened the door and there they were. My mother and father standing on my porch like strangers who had taken a wrong turn. She wore that thin cardigan she always reached for when she wanted to look fragile. He didn't say a word. I knew why they came. I knew what they wanted. But after 15 years of paying their bills, covering for their emergencies, and being invisible at every family gathering, I wasn't the same daughter they remembered. I listened. I let them speak. And then I said one sentence that ended everything. You won't believe what happened after I closed that door. The lodge was buzzing with life when Audrey arrived. Warm wood-paneled walls, red-checkered tablecloths, and buffet trays giving off clouds of steam. Kids were zigzagging between folding chairs, plastic juice boxes clutched in their hands, squealing as they dodged a giant cooler someone had dragged in. On the porch, someone had queued up Fleetwood Mac, and the bass from Go Your Own Way was thudding through the floorboards like a pulse. It was chaotic. It was loud. It was familiar in that uniquely American family reunion kind of way where too many generations were packed into one space, trying to smile through old wounds. Audrey stepped inside with a breath held in hope. For once, just once, she wanted this day to pass without walking away in tears. She greeted a few second cousins, smiled at someone who might have been her uncle's new wife, and accepted a plastic cup of sangria with a polite laugh. Her dad, Thomas, was across the room laughing about something with a cousin Audrey hadn't seen in years. He looked lighter than usual, looser, and for a second, just a second, Audrey thought maybe this year will be different. Maybe it won't be perfect, but maybe no one will cry in the car on the way home. She'd come prepared with a quiet gift, a dinner reservation at the French restaurant her parents always mentioned but never splurged on. She slipped the printed reservation beneath their dinner plate when no one was watching. It wasn't meant to be a grand gesture. It was just something thoughtful. That was how she liked it, simple, meaningful, invisible. Bella, of course, had made an entrance. She twirled around the lodge in a white sundress, barefoot hair, curled and golden in the late afternoon light. She looked like an ad for lemon bars. In her hands, she carried something wrapped in tissue paper and tied with ribbon. A gift, obviously. Audrey didn't think much of it. Bella was always the performer, the creative one. Her gifts were often handmade and loud in sentiment. The plan had been simple. Eat, hug a few people, avoid any awkward conversations, and go home. But then someone handed Bella a microphone. Audrey watched her sister laugh bashfully. "Oh gosh, I didn't plan to say anything," Bella said, which of course meant she had been rehearsing it for days. "Sorry to interrupt," she continued, her voice bubbling, "but I just have a little something for our amazing parents." She turned, holding out the tissue-wrapped frame to Victoria, their mother. Victoria took it with soft hands, peeled back the wrapping, and revealed a collage. A grid of family photos. Vacations, birthdays, random porch selfies. Except it wasn't really the family. It was Bella, and more Bella. There wasn't a single photo of Audrey, not even one shoved off in the corner. Victoria blinked. Then she smiled. Slowly, deliberately, she stood. Glass in hand, voice clear. "This," she said, holding the frame up, "this is the daughter who's always loved us." A few people clapped. Someone murmured, "Aw." Then she added louder this time. The other one, "She's never lifted a finger." It hit like a slap in the middle of a toast. The room shifted. Someone coughed. A fork clinked against the floor. Audrey didn't need to turn around to feel the eyes. The confusion, the collective tightening of posture, the silent demand to pretend it hadn't happened. But she didn't pretend. Audrey stood up, calmly. No drama, no raised voice. She set her sangria on the table. "I guess I didn't lift a finger," she said, her voice cutting through the murmur like glass on tile, "because I was too busy lifting your mortgage, your utility bills, Bella's tuition." The lodge fell completely silent. Victoria's face froze mid-smile. Bella's fingers clutched the frame tighter. Thomas lowered his drink but didn't say a word. Audrey didn't elaborate. She didn't shout or cry or list the late-night wire transfers, the surprise dentist bills, the holidays she missed so she could pick up overtime. She didn't mention the time she bailed Bella out of credit card debt or paid for the roof repair that nobody else could afford. She didn't need to. She adjusted the strap of her purse, stepped away from the table, and walked out the door. The cool evening air hit her face as she stepped onto the porch. The Fleetwood Mac song had ended. A cousin was fumbling with the speaker trying to line up the next track. Audrey passed him wordlessly, her heels clicking against the wooden slats, and kept walking. She didn't look back. Not once. Not even when someone called her name. For the first time in her life, Audrey didn't care what anyone else thought. For the first time, she wasn't going to stay in a room where the truth was unwelcome. The silence that followed her wasn't empty. It was full. Full of everything they had chosen to ignore. And full of everything she was finally done carrying. The road stretched out in front of Audrey, long and quiet, lit only by the passing blur of headlights and the occasional flicker of a street lamp. She drove in silence. No music, no podcasts, not even the hum of a phone call to fill the space. Just the low whir of the tires on asphalt and the gentle tick of the blinker when she passed through sleepy intersections. 2 hours of open road, but her mind was louder than any traffic. Her mother's voice still echoed in her head. She's never lifted a finger, said so casually, so publicly. As if Audrey had been a ghost all these years, not the very foundation of the house they lived in, not the lifeline behind every emergency bill they couldn't afford. Audrey's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Not out of anger, not anymore, but out of something deeper. Grief, maybe. Recognition. Not of something new, but of a truth she had been too tired to name before she had been erased. Bit by bit. Quietly. Over time. They hadn't done it with malice. Not intentionally. That was the part that made it worse. She'd started helping when she got her first real job at 24. It began with small things. An extra $200 when the power company sent a shut-off notice, a grocery run when Bella was in between jobs again. But over time, the numbers grew. They always did. The house payment that just needed to be covered for a month turned into years of mortgage assistance. The medical bills that came every 6 months, like clockwork. The student loans she paid off for Bella when their parents couldn't co-sign. The surprise vet bill for a dog Audrey never met. She hadn't tracked it at first. But one night, out of pure curiosity, or maybe desperation, she opened a spreadsheet and started plugging in numbers. Line by line, year by year, mortgage payments $48,600, utilities $35,760, groceries and household needs $21,240, medical expenses $780 in prescriptions and copays, roof repair $6,850, Bella's tuition $17,950, transmission repair on the family car $1,810, a canceled vacation deposit $2,300, and about a dozen other small things that added up quietly when no one was looking. Total over $147,000. She'd never said the number out loud, never even hinted at it. It wasn't about being thanked. She didn't need them to throw her a parade or post about her on Facebook. She just wanted respect, a seat at the table, a memory in the frame, but at every turn she was the shadow, the one called when the internet went down, when the tax forms got confusing, when Bella's credit card got declined. She was the helper, the fixer, the background support. Bella, on the other hand, got the hugs, the handmade cards, the tearful toasts. Bella made glittery scrapbooks and choreographed birthday songs. Audrey sent auto payments and reminders to check the smoke detectors. Their mother would say Bella just shows her love differently. But so did Audrey. Love in the form of rent checks and late-night Venmo transfers, and saying yes every time they asked, even when it meant saying no to herself. She wasn't jealous of Bella. That was the worst part. She really wasn't. She just wanted to be seen. Even once. Just once. But when the mic was in Victoria's hand, when the eyes of 52 family members were watching, Audrey wasn't even an afterthought. She was invisible. As the city skyline finally reappeared in the distance, she whispered it to herself, not out loud, just in thought. I'm a light bulb. You only notice me when I go out. That's what it felt like. Flickering in the corner doing what she was supposed to do quietly, never asking for attention, never failing, just glowing in the background while everyone else got the applause. She thought about the times they called her not for holidays or birthdays, but when the water heater broke or when Bella needed help filling out FAFSA. She remembered the Christmas she spent alone in her apartment because she couldn't take time off from work, and Bella posted photos of a homemade wreath captioned, "Family First." No one asked where Audrey was. The most painful part wasn't the erasure itself. It was how easy they made it look, like she had never been there in the first place. She didn't want revenge. That wasn't what this was. It wasn't even about money. It was about the years, the hours, the versions of herself she'd traded away to make sure they were okay. All without a single story told in her honor. No frame, no photo, no mention. When she finally pulled into her driveway, the house looked smaller than usual. Not because it had changed, but because she sat in the car for a moment longer, letting the engine click as it cooled. The quiet wasn't empty anymore. It was full. Of everything she had given, of everything they had forgotten. She took a breath and stepped out, walking slowly up the steps to her front door. The porch light flicked on automatically. It didn't need praise. It just worked when it was needed. But even light bulbs burn out eventually. The sun hadn't fully risen when Audrey opened her eyes. The bedroom was still dim, the early light casting soft shadows against the walls. She lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the refrigerator in the next room. Everything in her home was calm, quiet, intact. But her phone, still face down on the nightstand, buzzed again with another call. When she turned it over, the screen lit up with a string of missed calls. 38, all from the same tight circle. Victoria, Thomas, Bella, over and over like a chorus of panic. The first came in at 6:17 a.m., her mother, of course, leading the charge, then Thomas, then Bella, who alone had called 14 times. The same sister who hadn't reached out in months unless it involved help with taxes or renewing her license. Audrey sat up slowly, wrapping her blanket around her shoulders like armor. She wasn't surprised. Not anymore. If anything, she was curious. Curious how long it would take before they realized the foundation was cracking beneath them. She padded into the kitchen, barefoot, made herself coffee. Black, no sugar. She didn't rush to answer. The phone buzzed again and again as she sat on the edge of the counter, mug in hand, eyes locked on the screen. There was something oddly peaceful about it, watching their names flash across the display. Their urgency, their desperation, their confusion. Eventually she picked up, not because she felt obligated, but because she wanted to see how they'd spin it. Bella's voice came through immediately, tight with tension. "Oh, thank God. Where did you go? Are you okay?" Audrey sipped her coffee. "I'm great." Bella exhaled like she hadn't realized she was holding her breath. "Well, we can't get on the boat." Audrey blinked. "What boat?" "The group tour. The sightseeing cruise we were all supposed to take this morning. They said it was canceled. Something about the card not going through." Audrey said. What do you mean that? The card on file was yours. I canceled it." There was a beat of stunned silence. But why Audrey's voice didn't shift? Because Mom stood up in front of 52 people and said I'd never lifted a finger. So I figured I might as well make it true. Bella didn't respond right away. She was probably blinking in slow confusion, trying to decide if this was a joke. The whole trip she finally asked, "Yep, lodging too. That cabin." "It was under my name. They don't even have a way back unless someone pays." There was another long pause. Bella's tone changed, frustration mixing with disbelief. "So, what you expect me to cover it now?" "I don't expect anything," Audrey said softly. "You're the daughter who's always loved them. I'm sure they'll understand." And then she hung up. No yelling, no explanation, just a gentle click. She didn't feel triumphant. There was no victorious rush, no cinematic swell of emotion, just stillness, a kind of internal quiet that had been missing for years. For so long she had operated like a background system, functional, reliable, invisible. She had never asked for applause, never once said, "Just so you know, that trip you're enjoying, that roof over your head, that emergency dental work, I paid for that." She'd simply done it quietly while the spotlight stayed on Bella. And now, just as quietly, she was undoing it. After her second cup of coffee, she moved to the living room and opened her laptop. It was methodical, almost soothing, the way she moved from one account to another. First the mortgage autopay, disabled. Then the utility bills, electric, water, gas, each one logged into, reviewed and canceled. The gas card she paid off every month, closed. The grocery delivery service her parents used every week, canceled. She even let the dental plan lapse. No message, no warning, no long goodbye. The joint account she'd opened for household emergencies, meant to be temporary, meant to give them breathing room during a tough year, was shut down. She closed it without hesitation. Then came the bigger one, the cabin, the group vacation, the one they'd been talking about for months, bragging about to neighbors and tagging on Facebook. Audrey had reserved everything, booked the rooms, paid the deposit, handled the logistics. She canceled every last part: cabin, group dinners, transport. She didn't notify them. She didn't need to. They'd find out soon enough. She pictured them standing at the dock in their matching reunion shirts, blinking at the clerk who politely informed them that their reservation no longer existed. Victoria probably tried to demand an explanation. Bella likely panicked. Thomas would have said nothing, just scratched the back of his neck and stared off at the water, waiting for someone else to fix it. By the time noon rolled around, the texts changed tone. They weren't frantic anymore. They were quieter, less frequent, like they were regrouping, like someone had finally said, maybe give her space. Audrey laughed out loud at the thought. Give her space, as if she were throwing a tantrum over the wrong brand of juice instead of finally stepping away after more than a decade of being used. The silence that followed wasn't punishment. It wasn't revenge. It was clarity. She wasn't going to pay to be disrespected. She wasn't going to keep sacrificing parts of herself just to maintain someone else's comfort. If they wanted to pretend she hadn't been holding everything up fine, let them feel what it was like when she stopped. By the end of the day, her digital paper trail had vanished like mist. No more bills in her name. No more linked accounts. No more invisible strings tying her to a family that only remembered her when things broke. Audrey stood in her kitchen, mug in hand, and breathed in the quiet. Let them figure it out. Let them remember what it felt like to have things just work. Then let them wonder what changed. And when they finally realized the silence wasn't accidental, maybe, just maybe, they'd hear what she'd been saying all along. The next round of calls started right after lunch. Audrey had just finished folding the laundry when her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. Again. The screen lit up with Bella's name. Again. She'd already ignored the first few, assuming Bella would get tired eventually. But she hadn't. She was relentless. Audrey picked up the phone and stared at it for a long moment before finally answering. Not out of guilt, not out of curiosity, just readiness. She was ready to hear what came next. Bella didn't wait for a greeting. "Are you serious right now?" Her voice snapped through the line, full of fire and disbelief. "You canceled everything." Audrey didn't blink. "Good afternoon to you, too." "I'm not playing around, Audrey. They're freaking out. The card doesn't work. The cabin's been given to someone else, and now the gas station won't even let Dad pay for a tank to get us home." Audrey poured water into her coffee machine, calm and deliberate. Bella continued, voice rising. "You could have warned us. You didn't have to just disappear and take everything with you." "I didn't disappear," Audrey said, pressing the brew button. "I just stopped holding everything up." Bella scoffed. "You're being dramatic." Audrey raised an eyebrow, even though Bella couldn't see it. "No, I'm being accurate." There was a pause, then Bella's tone shifted. Still defensive, but now laced with panic. They have no way to get back Audrey. No backup plan. No money left on them. You left them stranded. Audrey took a breath and said it clearly, simply. Mom said I never helped. I'm just living accordingly. Are you seriously throwing her words back in her face right now, Bella? Audrey said, leaning against the counter for 15 years. I've paid for everything from your textbooks to their plumbing repairs. I've skipped vacations, canceled plans, worked double shifts, so they wouldn't drown. And I never said a word. I never asked for anything in return. I didn't need applause. But then she stood up in front of everyone and said, I've never lifted a finger. It was just a stupid toast, Bella argued. She didn't mean it like that. Audrey stirred a teaspoon of sugar into her mug. She said it in front of 52 people. That's not a slip. That's a choice. They don't know what to do now, Bella said, her voice cracking just slightly. They're scared. Then I guess it's your time to step up. There was silence on the other end. What does that mean? Bella asked, cautious now. You're the daughter who's always loved them, right? Audrey replied, her tone flat but not unkind. I'm sure they'll understand. Bella's breath hitched. You can't be serious. I am, Audrey said. You expect me to cover all of it. I expect you to do whatever you feel is right, just like I did. For a decade and a half. They're not going to make it without help. Audrey took a sip of her coffee. Then help them. I don't have the money, Bella admitted, almost whispering now. Audrey paused, letting that land. That's unfortunate. God, Bella muttered. You're being so cold. No, Audrey said gently. I'm just done being the warm body everyone runs to when things fall apart. There was a long, charged silence. Bella didn't hang up immediately. Audrey could hear her breathing as if trying to think of one more thing to say, something that might twist this moment back into her favor. But there was nothing left, nothing that would undo what had already been done. Audrey let her wait. Finally, Bella spoke. You know they're never going to forget this, right? Good, Audrey said. Neither will I. And then she ended the call. She set her phone down and didn't look at it again. Not to check for another incoming call, not to second-guess her response, not to wonder if Bella was sitting somewhere stewing or crying or plotting what to say next. It didn't matter anymore. For the first time in years, Audrey felt still. Not angry, not proud, not spiteful, just still. She opened the window in the kitchen, letting in a breeze that smelled faintly of late summer and cut grass. She took her mug to the couch, curled her legs underneath her, and stared out at the tree in her front yard. The branches moved lazily in the wind like they had all the time in the world. And maybe finally so did she. No more sudden calls because someone forgot to pay the internet bill. No more late-night wiring of rent money because Bella's yoga studio hours got cut again. No more last-minute vacation deposits. No more being everyone's emergency plan. She didn't owe anyone a breakdown. She didn't owe them an explanation. They had told the world she did nothing. Now they could live without everything she'd done. Audrey sipped her coffee and breathed in the quiet. It was the most peaceful she'd felt in 15 years. It was nearly dark when Audrey heard the knock. She had just settled in for the evening, a blanket over her lap, the soft hum of the dishwasher in the background. At first she thought it might be a neighbor or maybe a package left too late in the day, but when she peeked through the peephole, her stomach didn't twist. It didn't clench with dread or anticipation. It simply settled. There they were. Thomas stood a few steps behind Victoria's arms, crossed tightly over his chest, his gaze somewhere near the potted fern on her porch. Victoria looked smaller than usual, wrapped in one of those light cardigans she wore when she wanted to seem delicate. Her makeup was gone, her hair a little windblown. She looked like she hadn't slept. Audrey didn't open the door right away. She just stood there for a moment behind the wood, letting them wait. Then slowly she turned the knob and stepped into the doorway, but didn't move aside. Victoria's eyes met hers. "Hi," she said softly, almost like a question. "Can we come in?" Audrey shook her head once. "No, but we can talk here." Victoria glanced behind her as if embarrassed to be standing on the porch visible from the street. She tugged her sleeves down over her wrists. "We just want to clear the air," she said. I'm sure Audrey replied, her tone neutral. "What happened at the reunion?" Victoria began. "That wasn't meant the way it sounded." Audrey tilted her head. "It sounded pretty clear." "It was a moment," Victoria said. "Bella had just given us that photo collage and everyone was watching. She's been going through a hard time." "She always is," Audrey said quietly. Victoria pressed on. "She's trying, Audrey. You know how much she struggles. She wanted to do something nice and it caught me off guard. I didn't mean to hurt you." So Audrey said slowly, "You decided to announce she was the good daughter and I was what, a ghost? An afterthought." "That's not fair," Victoria said quickly. "No," Audrey replied. "What's not fair is paying over $150,000 toward your bills over the past 15 years and hearing you tell a room full of people that I never lifted a finger." That silenced them both. Victoria's face froze. Thomas blinked but didn't speak. Audrey hadn't planned to say it. But once the words left her mouth, she felt something heavy fall away. "That number's real," by the way she added. "I ran the math, mortgage payments, utilities, groceries, the dentist bill that always seemed to show up every 6 months, the time Bella maxed out her credit card and couldn't breathe from the stress. I paid it all." Thomas cleared his throat, finally speaking. "We never asked you to." Audrey turned toward him. "No, you didn't. You just let me, year after year." Silence. Victoria looked down at the welcome mat beneath her feet. Thomas shifted his weight like he wanted to be anywhere else. Audrey stood tall in the doorway. "So what?" Victoria asked after a long pause. "This is about money." Audrey shook her head. "It's about you standing in front of everyone and pretending I never existed. It's about watching people nod while you rewrote history. It's about giving everything I had so you wouldn't struggle. And being told I'd never helped." Victoria's voice dropped. "We didn't think you'd take it so personally." Audrey let out a quiet, almost amused breath. "Well, here we are." Victoria reached for something softer. Her voice changed. Smaller, more pleading. "We just want to fix this. We love you." Audrey met her eyes. "Then maybe you should have said that. Instead of pretending the last 15 years never happened." Victoria nodded like she understood. "But then she said Bella didn't mean to hurt you." "She didn't say it," Audrey replied. "You did. That hung in the air like smoke." Finally, Audrey drew in a breath. "If you came here to ask for help with the house, I'm not the right daughter anymore." Victoria's mouth opened, then closed. Thomas didn't speak. Audrey took a step back. Not to let them in, just enough to signal she was finished. "I paid to be erased," she said, voice steady. "Now you get to live without me." And then she closed the door. No yelling, no dramatic exit, just a quiet click as the lock slid back into place. Inside, Audrey leaned her back against the wood and exhaled. She didn't cry. She didn't shake. There was no rush of adrenaline, just a clean, deep sense of finality. She had spent years holding them up financially, emotionally, invisibly. She had asked for so little and given so much, and when they had the chance to honor that, to see her, they chose to turn away. So now she was choosing to walk. Outside, she heard their footsteps retreat slowly from the porch. No parting words, no apologies. Just the fading sound of realization too late to fix what they broke. Audrey stayed by the door until their car engine faded down the street. Then she turned off the porch light, poured herself a glass of water, and let the stillness wrap around her like something earned. It was 2 days later when Bella showed up again. She didn't call ahead, didn't text, Just rang the bell twice, quick and sharp, like she was in a rush. Man. Audrey was in the middle of folding laundry when she heard it. The sound made her pause not from surprise, but from a quiet, steady intuition. She knew it was Bella before she even looked through the window. When Audrey opened the door, Bella didn't wait for an invitation. She walked in like it was still years ago, like nothing had changed, like she was just popping by to borrow shoes without asking. In her hand was a reusable grocery bag sagging and half full. Inside were canned soups, a pack of off-brand paper towels, some dry pasta. No produce, no fresh food, just the kind of shelf-stable essentials you grabbed when your wallet was nearly empty. "You know what you're doing to them, right?" Bella asked, standing in the middle of the room as if the confrontation had been rehearsed. "They're panicking. The mortgage is due in 3 days. They don't have enough." Audrey shut the door calmly behind her. "You'll have to be more specific." "They said they don't even know how to keep the lights on." Audrey nodded. "Interesting." Bella's frustration grew. "You didn't even warn them. You mean after Mom stood up in front of 52 people and said I never did anything for them?" Audrey's voice was even unshaken. She got caught up in the moment. Then let the moment pay the bills. Bella rolled her eyes, but she didn't argue. "You're being spiteful," she said instead. "No," Audrey replied. "I'm being factual. You all said I never helped. I'm just adjusting my behavior to match your version of reality. They don't have the money, Audrey. You live with them." Bella blinked, clearly not expecting that shift. "You don't pay rent," Audrey continued. "You don't cover utilities. But you do have time to make scrapbook collages and post about self-care Sunday." Bella's mouth opened like she wanted to respond, but no words came out. She looked around the room instead, her eyes flicking over the couch, the books on the shelf, the soft lighting in Audrey's peaceful home. "That's not fair," she said quietly. Neither was the speech. The silence stretched between them. "They're our parents," Bella said finally, her voice lower now. "You're just going to let them struggle." "No," Audrey said. "I'm going to let you step up. You're the daughter who always loved them, remember?" Bella's face faltered. Not a dramatic collapse, just a flicker, a tiny crack in the composure she always wore like armor. Her posture slouched slightly. The grocery bag in her hand dipped. "They need help." "Then help them." Bella exhaled hard through her nose. "I can't afford everything." Audrey didn't move. "Try harder." The words weren't sharp. They weren't cruel. They were simply honest. The kind of words you didn't say to wound someone, but to show them the mirror they'd been avoiding for years. Bella stood there, her shoulders drooping under the weight of responsibility that was suddenly hers to carry. Her hair was unbrushed, pulled into a messy knot. Her shirt was wrinkled. There were dark circles under her eyes that no concealer could hide. She looked like someone who hadn't slept well in days. Someone who had finally begun to understand what it meant to hold things together. "You don't have to enjoy this," Bella said, almost accusingly. "I don't," Audrey said softly. "But I'm not going to stop it." Bella didn't reply. She just looked down at the bag in her hand like she wasn't even sure why she brought it. Audrey didn't offer her a seat, didn't reach out. She simply walked over to the door and opened it again. Bella stood there a second longer as if expecting a shift in tone, a moment of softness, a change of heart. But none came. "You liked the spotlight," Audrey said gently. "Now it's your turn to carry the weight." Bella didn't argue. She walked out without another word. Audrey closed the door behind her. There was no slam, no click of finality, just the quiet hush of wood meeting frame. Back inside, Audrey poured herself a glass of water and returned to her folded laundry. She moved slowly, intentionally. The room felt still, not heavy but real, not empty but earned. She didn't celebrate Bella's unraveling. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't about watching her sister fall. It was about truth, about letting everyone finally sit in the reality she had lived in for over a decade. Because when you carry everything for too long, people forget how heavy it really is, until they have to lift it themselves. And now Bella was learning, one grocery bag at a time. The post went up late Sunday night. It was a smiling photo, warm and golden in the fading light. Taken on the last evening of the reunion just before everything crumbled. Victoria had captioned it simply, "Family means everything." The comments rolled in quickly, hearts, smiley faces, generic well-wishes from distant relatives and family friends who hadn't seen the full picture. On the surface, it looked like a celebration, like the family was intact, whole bonded, but Audrey saw it for what it was. She hadn't been tagged, she hadn't been mentioned, her name appeared nowhere in the photo's context, and yet she was the loudest silence in the room. She knew most of the people who saw the picture were at the reunion. They had heard Victoria's toast. They had watched Audrey leave. The omission wasn't accidental. It was deliberate. Audrey didn't respond right away. She let it sit, let the moment simmer in its own dishonesty. Then the comments began to shift. A few quiet murmurs, a question from a cousin. "Hey, where's Audrey?" A vague comment from someone else, thought that moment during the speech was a bit harsh. And then a sharper one, clearly from someone who hadn't spoken to Audrey in years. She always was a little distant, not really involved. Audrey noticed the comment got a like. From her mother. She stared at it for a long moment. That tiny gesture. A like. A digital nod of agreement. Public. Passive. Real. And that was when she knew. It wasn't just what Victoria had said that day. It was what she was willing to keep saying even when the damage was done. It wasn't just a mistake. It was a choice. Audrey closed her laptop without responding, but the next morning she opened it again. Not out of spite, not out of anger, out of clarity. She pulled up her files. Receipts, emails, payment confirmations. She opened her bank records. She printed screen after screen of wire transfers, utilities, paid credit cards, cleared. She found the email where she booked the family vacation cabin, the confirmation of Bella's tuition deposit, the monthly grocery service invoice. The text messages confirming their furnace repair was covered, all of it, quietly filed over the years, proof of everything no one had seen. And then she wrote a caption. She didn't mention names. She didn't tag anyone. There was no sarcasm, no clever dig, just the facts. Sometimes silence isn't peace, it's exhaustion. 15 years of quiet support adds up. Here's what you chose to ignore. Attached were the images, screenshots, PDFs, figures in black and white, dates, transactions, side-by-side comparisons of promises kept, and gratitude withheld. At the bottom of the post, she wrote one line in bold, "Total contribution, $147,590. She hit post, made it public, closed the app. She didn't check it again for hours. Didn't need to. She didn't post it to start a war. She posted it so that silence wouldn't be the final word. By evening, the original post from Victoria was gone. So were the comments from relatives who had tried to defend it. The vague judgment, the "she's always been cold" assumptions, all erased. Not with apologies, not with explanations, just deleted, quiet as a breath, gone. But the silence that followed wasn't heavy this time. It was satisfying. The kind of silence that happens after a storm when the sky clears and everything smells cleaner, lighter. Later that night, Audrey received a message from her Aunt Marianne. "I had no idea you'd done all that. You've always been so quiet about it." Then one from her cousin James. "That's insane. If I were you, I'd never speak to them again." Audrey didn't reply. She didn't need to. No one could say she was being petty. No one could call her vindictive. All she had done was hold up a mirror. She had spent 15 years keeping things running, making the impossible possible, and no one had ever noticed. Until she stopped. This time they couldn't pretend not to see her. This time she was undeniable. And still she wasn't angry. Just done. Completely, finally done. She closed her laptop, turned off the lights, and went to bed without checking her phone again. She knew there would be more messages, more apologies wrapped in self-preservation, more attempts to fix what they had broken without ever truly acknowledging it. But Audrey didn't need that. What she needed she had already given herself. The truth laid bare, not for revenge, not for attention, but for the peace that only comes when you let the truth speak for itself. And this time it did. By Monday morning, Audrey's phone had begun to light up again. But this time the messages were different. There were no missed calls from her parents, no panicked voicemails from Bella. Instead, quiet pings of incoming texts trickled in one by one. Names she hadn't seen in years appeared on her screen. Cousins, old family friends, distant relatives who had stood silently at the reunion but now found their voices behind private messages. "I had no idea you did all that one read. You've always been so quiet." Another came from her cousin James, the one who always sat near the drink table at family gatherings, polite but distant. "That post was eye-opening. Honestly, if I were you, I'd never speak to them again." Audrey didn't reply to most of them. She didn't feel the need. These weren't conversations, they were confessions. Tiny admissions that people had been watching from the sidelines, unsure of what they were seeing. Until now. The clarity was unavoidable. When you lay the truth out in black and white, it becomes difficult to look away. Throughout the day, the waves continued. A second cousin she hadn't spoken to since her grandmother's funeral sent a message with nothing but a crying face emoji. Someone else forwarded a meme about family forgiveness, followed by, "But seriously, wow!" The language varied. The tone shifted from surprise to sympathy, to, in some cases, uncomfortable silence. But the theme was the same. People were beginning to understand. Meanwhile, Audrey noticed something else. Quiet deletions. Victoria's original photo post was gone, scrubbed from her profile without comment. No apology, no explanation. Just gone. The flattering comments beneath it had disappeared too, like footprints in sand after a strong wind. A few other posts disappeared throughout the day. Ones where Bella had tagged their mother in scrapbook photos, ones where Thomas had posted about grateful family moments. All quietly erased. They didn't make statements. They didn't push back. They just vanished. Audrey didn't need a public apology. She didn't expect one. But there was something deeply satisfying about the silence. Not the kind she had known before, where her efforts were overlooked, where her name wasn't included. This silence felt different. It was heavy, embarrassed. It was the silence that came when people realized they'd been wrong and didn't know how to say it. By Tuesday, a small thread on a community Facebook page had begun to circulate. It was anonymous, but clearly referencing Audrey's story. Someone had screenshotted the now deleted reunion photo and added a line. "Ever wonder what happens when the quiet one finally speaks?" The comment section filled quickly. One user wrote, "This is what accountability looks like." Another added, "It's not vengeance. It's just truth." Some people call it a breakdown. I call it a public reckoning. Public reckoning. That phrase stuck. It wasn't viral in the mainstream sense. This wasn't trending on national news or blowing up across platforms. But it was echoing through the corners of her community, in quiet group chats, in cousin-to-cousin texts, in side conversations over dinner tables. The story was being told and retold, reshaped with each voice, but the center remained the same. The girl they'd all forgotten had reminded them she was never invisible. Audrey checked her inbox that evening. Dozens of unread messages. Most were more of the same. "We didn't know. You always seemed so independent. Wish I had your strength." Some part of her used to crave those words. She remembered years ago fantasizing about the moment her family would finally see her. A birthday dinner where someone would raise a glass to her, a heartfelt thank you note, even just a line in a holiday card. But now that the recognition had arrived belated and sudden, it didn't stir the satisfaction she thought it would. Not because it didn't matter, but because it no longer defined her. She had moved beyond needing their acknowledgement. She had reclaimed something far more powerful, her time, her energy, her peace, and the world had noticed. Audrey leaned back in her chair, looking out the window at the dusky street below. A neighbor across the way was watering her plants. A kid pedaled past on a bright green bike. Life moved on, steady and unaffected. But inside her house, inside her own skin, something had shifted permanently. There would be no dramatic reconciliation, no tearful reunion scene. Just this: awareness and consequences. People could say what they wanted, delete what made them uncomfortable, pretend the past hadn't been what it was. But Audrey had made one thing clear: she wasn't going to carry the weight of their silence anymore. She was no longer the family's unspoken backbone. She was her own. As the last of the sun dipped behind the rooftops, Audrey turned off her phone, stood up, and walked away from the screen. The messages would still be there tomorrow. But tonight she didn't need them. What she needed, she already had: peace, boundaries, and the knowledge that she had spoken her truth. And this time the world had listened. It was late afternoon when Audrey saw them from the window. Victoria, Thomas, and Bella stood at the bottom of her porch steps. Not knocking, not calling out, just standing there. Quiet, still, shoulders slumped like kids waiting outside the principal's office. There was no dramatic entry, no last-minute rehearsal of lines, just three people who looked far more fragile than she had ever seen them. Audrey didn't move right away. She watched them through the sheer curtain for a moment, her breath steady, her thoughts calm. No anxiety, no dread, just clarity. Eventually, she opened the door. They looked up in unison. Victoria's face was pale, her lipstick faint like she had forgotten to reapply it. Thomas looked older. His shirt, wrinkled eyes, tired. Bella, who once glowed in every room she entered, now looked faded, her skin dull, her posture unsure. Victoria was the first to speak. "We're sorry," she said softly. Her voice didn't carry the edge it once had. There was no defense left in it, just defeat. Audrey said nothing. She didn't need to. "We shouldn't have said what we said," Victoria continued. "It was stupid. We didn't think—" "No," Audrey said gently. "You did think. You just didn't think it would cost you anything." Victoria looked down at her shoes. Thomas shifted uncomfortably. Bella kept her gaze fixed on the wooden steps beneath her. It was in the moment Victoria tried again. "You know how I get sometimes. And I liked hearing it." Bella added, her voice tight. "That's on me. I should have corrected her. I didn't. I let it happen because it felt good. And I'm sorry." Audrey took a breath. The apology wasn't shocking. It wasn't unexpected. But it was too late to matter. "It doesn't change anything," she said, her tone level. "You told 52 people that I never lifted a finger. You said it while my name was still on your mortgage, your bills, your utilities, while I was still paying down debts that weren't mine, while I was still covering for a family that couldn't even say my name in a photo caption." Thomas's jaw tensed, but he didn't speak. "I paid $147,000 to be erased," Audrey said. "And now you get to live with that." There was no anger in her voice, no accusation, just truth. Victoria swallowed hard. Bella's shoulders sagged further. "We didn't mean it," Victoria said again, barely above a whisper. "It doesn't matter anymore," Audrey replied. A gust of wind stirred the leaves on the porch. The quiet that followed wasn't tense. It was final. Audrey looked at each of them. "I'm not angry," she said. "Not anymore." Victoria's eyes lifted, hopeful for a second. "I'm just done." The hope in her mother's eyes flickered out. Bella blinked rapidly, but no tears came. She looked like someone who had already cried all she could cry. Thomas finally spoke. "We didn't realize how much you carried." "No," Audrey said. "You didn't want to." Nobody argued. She could have opened the door wider, could have invited them in, asked them to sit, offered them coffee. She could have offered forgiveness, a second chance, a new start. But forgiveness isn't just a word. It's a rebuild, a process, a choice. And Audrey had spent 15 years choosing them, quietly, patiently, at the cost of herself. They had one chance to choose her, and they chose not to. So now she chose peace. She stepped back just enough to signal the conversation was over. "You should go," she said simply. Victoria nodded slowly. Bella turned away first, walking down the steps, like someone leaving an old chapter behind. Thomas followed silent. Victoria lingered for half a second longer before turning too. Audrey closed the door. There was no slam. Just the soft, decisive click of a lock finding its place. Inside, the house felt still. Not empty, not cold, but settled. She walked back to her living room, curled up on the couch, and pulled the blanket over her knees. She didn't check her phone, didn't scroll through messages. She just let herself sit in the moment. This wasn't about winning. It wasn't about revenge. It was about release, letting go of the need to be understood by people who had chosen not to see her, letting go of the roles she had played for so long. Provider, fixer, background support, and stepping fully into herself. There would be no closure scene, no dramatic reconciliation. Just the quiet certainty that she had drawn the line, and this time it held. On the other side of that door stood the people who once defined her world, and inside was the woman who had finally learned how to walk away from it. A few months passed. The silence from her family had held. Not the strained, passive-aggressive kind of silence Audrey had grown used to over the years, but a true one, complete. And this time it didn't feel like punishment. It felt like space. One afternoon, Audrey got a message from her cousin James. Just one sentence. Heard Bella moved out. No details, no address, no note. Bella had quietly packed up, left their parents' house, and didn't tell anyone where she was going. A friend of a friend said she was working part-time at a small bookstore in another town, sleeping on a futon, trying to keep the lights on in a one-bedroom walk-up with bad plumbing. Audrey didn't follow up. She didn't ask around. Not out of bitterness, but because she no longer felt responsible for carrying Bella's story. For the first time in their lives, her sister was writing her own chapter. Audrey hoped it was honest. As for Victoria and Thomas, word traveled just as quietly. They'd sold the house, the same house Audrey had helped save from foreclosure more than once. The house where her name had lived on bills, on loan paperwork, on late-night emergency checks. Gone. Sold in a hurry. No farewell tour. No final family dinner in the kitchen, just packed boxes, a for sale sign, and the reality that they couldn't afford to keep up the life they once took for granted. A cousin passed by their new place a few weeks later, a rental unit on the edge of town, thin walls, flickering lights, peeling paint, not awful but modest, a steep drop from the suburban comfort they'd once had. She described it as quiet, like they're hiding. Audrey didn't say anything in response. She just nodded and went back to her tea. And for the first time in what felt like forever, her life was simple. There were no late-night texts asking for help with insurance forms, no frantic voicemails about broken water heaters, no passive requests buried in emotional manipulation. Her phone stayed mostly quiet. Her mailbox held nothing but bills with her own name on them. Her evenings were her own. She went for walks, read books, sometimes stayed up late watching documentaries no one else wanted to see. She spent an entire weekend reorganizing her closet just because she could. Not because someone needed her to fix something, not because she was running from chaos, but because she finally had the time and space to just exist. She laughed more, slept better, felt in small but powerful ways like herself again. There were moments, sure, when she thought about them, random ones. Passing a certain grocery aisle, hearing a song her mom used to hum, seeing someone at the farmer's market who looked vaguely like Bella from behind. But the thoughts came and went like the wind, soft, without sting, without pull. People say that walking away from family is one of the hardest things you can do. And they're right. But no one talks enough about what it's like after. The quiet, the relief, the weight that slowly lifts once you realize your value was never dependent on who claimed to love you the loudest. That love isn't measured in holiday photos or sugary captions. It's measured in action, in presence, in whether someone shows up when it matters, not just when they're being watched. Audrey never expected a perfect family. She never needed one, but she had spent so long trying to earn a place that should have been hers all along. And now she had something better than approval. She had freedom. One evening she sat out on her porch, a blanket over her lap, the air cool and crisp with the scent of the changing season. A neighbor's dog barked in the distance. Across the street, someone's porch light blinked on. She stared into the dusk and thought about how much had changed, how much she had changed. Some people think family is forever. Others learn. It's conditional. And maybe, just maybe, that's okay. Because sometimes in letting go of what's broken, you finally get to hold on to what's real. Audrey took a slow sip of tea, let it settle in her chest, and leaned back into the quiet. Then just once she whispered into the night, "Did I go too far? Or not far enough?" The breeze didn't answer, but it didn't need to. She already knew. She had gone exactly far enough. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, if you've ever been the one quietly holding everything together while being overlooked, then Audrey's story might have echoed something deep inside you. Sometimes walking away isn't about anger. It's about healing. Have you ever had to choose peace over connection? Have you ever been forced to stop showing up for people who never truly saw you? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your story in the comments. And if this touched you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss more stories like this. Stories of strength, truth, and finding your voice.